I never believed in perfection until the day I stepped out of a helicopter in a crisp white suit, heels landing on a lawn blanketed with pure white petals. Under the blazing late spring sun at the Foster's lakeside estate, everything looked so meticulously staged you'd think it was a movie set. But it wasn't. It was my ex-husband's wedding day, and the day I chose to expose every single lie. I could feel the stunned, confused stares as the blades roared above. In her custom wedding dress flown in from Paris, Elisa Foster, today's bride, turned to her soon-to-be husband, Mason Foster, with a puzzled smile. "Who planned this little show?" she whispered. But that smile froze the moment the helicopter door opened. I stepped out first, calm. My dark brown hair was tied back and the fitted suit sharpened my silhouette against the glowing scene below. I didn't say a word. I simply extended my hand behind me. 2 children, a boy and a girl, emerged, and each took one of my hands. Their eyes scanned the crowd, unbothered and unafraid, because they knew exactly why we were here. They had waited for this moment their whole lives. They were both 6 years old. I had taught them everything I knew: strength, truth, and how to stand tall when others bow their heads. They had Mason's black hair and his eyes, too, an unmistakable gaze that sent murmurs through the crowd. A gasp came from the front row. I met the eyes of Margaret, Mason's mother. She shot to her feet, one hand trembling over her mouth, the other clutching her purse so tightly the veins on her wrist popped. "Oh my God! Mason, their eyes." I kept walking. No one stopped me. No one dared. Mason stood frozen at the altar, surrounded by white ribbons and rose columns. His eyes, the eyes of the man who once meant everything to me, were now disturbingly blank. No anger, no joy, just confusion and maybe fear. Lissa clutched his arm. "Who is she? Mason, say something!" He didn't. Because Mason knew exactly who I was. "My name is Nora Walters," I said, my voice ringing through the strange silence of the ceremony. "And these are Ellis and Mira, my children, or more precisely, our children." A ripple of gasps ran through the garden, a wineglass shattered, someone dropped into their seat. But I didn't care about the audience. I only looked at Mason. "The day you kicked me out of our home," I continued, eyes locked on his, "I begged you to listen. But you believed fake photos, fabricated stories. You left me standing in the cold, when I was 2 months pregnant with twins." Mason took a step forward, as if to speak, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't say you didn't know," I said softly. "Because I left letters, I sent texts, I knocked on your door 3 times just to say one thing: I'm pregnant. And you never answered, not once." I turned to the children. Mira squeezed my hand tighter, while Ellis stared straight at Mason, his eyes drilling into the conscience of a man who'd never once seen his own children. I took a deep breath. My voice stayed calm, but every word sliced through the air filled with flowers and champagne. "I'm not here to win you back. I'm here to return the truth, and to let my children know who their father really is." Silence fell, no one moved. I knew this was only the beginning. Mason and I used to be called the perfect couple of biomedical research. A brilliant scientist and the golden heir to Foster Biotech, the 3rd largest pharmaceutical company in the U.S. People said we were the next generation of innovation and compassion. The press covered our wedding like it was the union of intellect and power. But those picture-perfect wedding photos were now just warped memories packed away in a box. I thought I'd never reopen. We met at a science conference in Chicago. Mason sat in the front row, focused as I presented my research on gene therapy for leukemia. Afterward, he approached me, bright eyes, a confident but respectful smile. Mason had all the charm of someone born to command boardrooms, but with just enough humility to make me feel seen. I fell in love with him, deeply, genuinely. We married a year later in an intimate ceremony at his grandparents' garden in Vermont. The early years were everything I dreamed of, working side by side at Foster Biotech, co-authoring medical journals, and planning health initiatives in South America. We were a team, inseparable. Until Carter, Mason's childhood friend, began helping him manage the company's finances. A few months later, Carter's sister Hannah appeared, perfect smile, seemingly harmless. Ideas for social collaboration. I never suspected a thing. When I traveled for conferences in Europe or late-night lab work, Hannah always happened to attend company events with Mason. And Carter, disturbingly smooth, kept reassuring me to be understanding of the pressure Mason's under. Then, everything unraveled, fast and seamlessly. One night, I came home from a short trip to Zurich to find Mason sitting silently in the living room, holding my phone, already opened to a string of texts I'd never seen. "I didn't want to believe this, Nora," he said, voice hoarse with either exhaustion or rage. I couldn't tell. "But how long have you been cheating on me, before or after we started trying for kids?" I froze. The phone displayed flirty messages with someone named Liam A. Mann I'd never met. Intimate words. Bedroom photos of us taken from angles I'd never seen before. "Mason, I don't know what this is, I swear." I reached for him. Don't touch me," he pulled back, hurt and furious. "Carter had everything checked, the photos, recordings, even a man's watch found in your drawer. Start explaining." I couldn't. I had no idea where it all came from. Then, just hours later, as I was still trying to piece things together, Carter walked into our home. Calm, calculated, as if he'd rehearsed this for months. "I'll have someone escort you out, Nora. The sooner the better. Mason needs space," he said without even looking at me, as if I were a stain to be scrubbed clean. I was thrown out of my own home on a freezing January night, no explanations, no second chances. They froze my accounts, changed my company email, and filed divorce papers before I even grasped what was happening. I lost everything, except for the 2 lives growing inside me which Mason never knew about. And now, as I stood here at the wedding he thought was his fresh start, I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming truth, the truth he refused to hear. And this time, I wouldn't stay silent. When the villa doors shut behind me with a cold click, I still believed I could turn things around in a matter of days. That Mason would realize his mistake, hear me out, remember the woman who stood by him for 5 years helping build life-saving treatments and breakthrough patents. But then my phone went dark, my email was disabled, my card was declined at a hotel near downtown Boston. That's when I realized they erased me, as if I had never existed in Mason Foster's life. 3 days later, I was living out of my old car, parked behind a 24-hour pharmacy. I ate with the loose bills in my coat and drank from public fountains. No home, no career, no one. One morning, after vomiting near a gas pump from the fuel fumes, a supermarket clerk came over with a grimace. "You okay? You look like you're about to pass out." I staggered upright, forcing a smile. I think I caught a cold, but deep down I knew. I'd missed my period by 3 weeks. I was pregnant. The shock wasn't from the pregnancy. I'd known. I just didn't want to believe everything was really over. That our family was truly broken. I'd planned to tell Mason the night I returned from Zurich. Instead, he ended our marriage with a carefully staged setup, orchestrated by Carter and Hannah. After hours in the car, rain tapping on the windshield, I walked into the pharmacy. I picked the cheapest test, paid in coins, and hid in the cold bathroom. 3 minutes later, 2 lines appeared, clear as day. I didn't cry. I just sat there gripping the test, heart pounding out of my chest. A week later, I got the divorce papers. Priority shipped from the Foster Biotech legal team. Attached was a condition. If I signed and agreed to stay silent about my personal matters with Mason, they would cover the pregnancy resolution expenses. They called my babies a matter to be resolved. I tore the papers up and dumped them in the nearest trash bin at a second-hand bookstore. The colleagues, the friends, the people who once called me the golden girl of biomedical research, gone. I lost my seat on Foster Biotech's science board. They pulled me from every research project I'd helped create. They erased my name from patents. One night, belly heavy, eyes burning, I curled up in my car on a deserted street, coat draped over my stomach. It was around 2 a.m., the street lamp a blur through rain-slicked glass, and I wondered, how does a PhD in biomedicine, a woman who once headlined over 10 global conferences, end up a pregnant homeless woman discarded by the man who once vowed to protect her? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing: I couldn't give up. That morning I went to the Hyde Park Community Center, a place I once funded for free vaccine research. I didn't know what I hoped for. Maybe just a clean bed? Instead, I met Marlene. She was the head nurse there, in her 60s, with gentle eyes and calloused hands. She didn't ask much. She just looked at me and said, "There are two kinds of people I never turn away, pregnant women and those the world's forgotten. Lucky for you, sweetheart, you're both." She took me upstairs to her modest apartment above the clinic, offering me the bed her daughter once slept in before losing her battle with cancer 3 years ago. When I hesitated, she just smiled. "You're not the first my daughter and I have helped, and you won't be the last." In that warm room, for the first time in weeks, I slept more than 4 straight hours without dreaming of the nightmare named Mason Foster. But I knew this was just the calm before I had to start over, and this time, I wasn't a woman longing for a perfect family. I was a mother, and I would fight for my children. The small attic room in Marlene's house wasn't fancy, but it felt more peaceful than anywhere I'd been since my life fell apart. Those first mornings, all I heard were sparrows chirping outside the old wooden window, and her soft footsteps around the kitchen as she made breakfast. Warm scones and mint tea. She never asked about Mason, never said the name that used to make me ache just to hear it. Instead, she placed a bowl of hot oatmeal in front of me and said, "Eat. Twins don't wait for you to recover from heartbreak before they grow." "Twins?" I repeated, thinking I misheard. She smiled and set an old ultrasound machine on the table. "I've been in medicine for 30 years, Nora. Don't ask how I know. Just know this. You'll need more pillows to sleep, and more courage to carry on." Her words froze me, not with fear, but because for the first time I saw light at the end of the tunnel. No one else had believed in me, not even silently. She did. And that was enough to make me rise. I began rebuilding my life from the smallest things. I sold the wedding ring Mason gave me on that hilltop in Vermont, got $18,400 0 cents for it. It was nowhere near its true value, but it was enough for a second-hand laptop, a new phone, and a few loose maternity clothes. At night, while Marlene read under the soft yellow lamp, I sat at the kitchen table, creating a full timeline. Every detail, every overlooked sign, every time Carter showed up too conveniently, every odd email I once dismissed, I documented it all. I remembered Mason once telling me, "Don't doubt Carter, he's the only family I've got left." I believed him. Now I know that blind trust was the fatal flaw that cost me everything. One night, while reviewing financial reports I used to be CC'd on, I noticed some numbers didn't add up. Foster Biotech had approved a trial drug project named T-Formal-1, I originally led, but after I was removed, the final report listed altered side effect data for Phase 2 patients. I had never seen those results during the testing phase. I printed the report, marked the discrepancies, then looked up the approval signature. Carter Langston, Chief Financial Officer. Not the research lead. Not quality control. Carter. The next morning I brought the file to Marlene. She looked at me like I'd just returned from war. "What are you planning to do?" "Expose the truth, not just for my name, but for the thousands of patients taking that drug every day." She nodded, slowly pouring more tea. "You'll need allies. And there's someone you should meet." That person was Dr. Evelyn Moore, a renowned cancer researcher who had abruptly resigned a few years ago due to ethical conflicts with Foster Biotech. I'd met her once at a conference, but never had the chance to talk. Marlene called her that same afternoon. When Evelyn learned who I was, she paused for a moment, then said, "If Nora Walters is ready to fight, I'm ready to listen." 3 days later, I arrived at the free clinic Evelyn now ran on the outskirts of Cambridge. No white lab coats, no sleek offices like before, just shelves of basic meds, long lines of patients, and a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s behind reading glasses. "I read what you sent, I know that drug," she said, her voice low but firm. "I resigned because I refused to sign off on the Phase 3 report. They found someone else, maybe." "You." My throat tightened. I was set up and pushed out. "Then it's time to make it right." From that day on, I worked mornings at Evelyn's clinic, processing patient data, collecting drug feedback. At night, I filtered through every detail, cross-checked information, and started building an official case. No one in the science community believed I had hit rock bottom. But the truth is, from that low point, I could clearly see who was climbing, and who they were stepping on. And this time, I wasn't just coming back for me. I was coming back for the two children growing inside me, Ellis and Mira. And I swore they would be born into a world where justice wasn't just an illusion. Working at Dr. Evelyn Moore's community clinic wasn't glamorous, nor tied to the breakthrough studies I once led. I started by entering medical records, reviewing side effect logs, and compiling patient feedback on the meds they were prescribed. It was routine, meticulous work. But for me, every number and every chart was a step back into science. A fresh start. My belly had started to show. Ellis and Mira kicked more with each passing day. Sometimes I'd stop typing, rest a hand over the bump and whisper, "Mama's not there yet, but we're on the right path." One March morning, while reviewing data from a group of pancreatic cancer patients on a test drug called S-Therma, I noticed something wrong. 19% showed elevated liver enzymes within the first 6 weeks, an alarming rate. Yet Foster Biotech's clinical report claimed it was under 5. I rechecked everything: age, medical history, dosage, duration. It was solid. There was no way this was statistical error. I printed the summary and brought it to Evelyn's office. She read it, then looked up, her calm demeanor gone. "You're sure?" "I've verified it 3 times, and here's what's worse. It's one of the new drugs Carter approved, after I was removed from the research board." Evelyn placed a hand on her chin, thoughtful. "This might not be a mistake. It could be deliberate." From that day our collaboration deepened. Each evening, after clinic hours, I joined Evelyn in her small back office to dissect internal reports, trace drug batch codes, and match them to real patient feedback. Evelyn was sharp, seasoned, and unafraid. She used to be the director of research at Foster Biotech, until she resigned in protest of shortened clinical trial phases, just to rush products to market. Once I asked her, "Why are you helping me when you could have just chosen peace?" She shrugged, smiling faintly. "Because I see myself in you. And this time, I'm not letting another Carter Langston win." She brought me to a secret lab she'd built inside an old warehouse in the Newton suburbs. Hidden behind gray brick walls was a fully equipped space with molecular analyzers, biofreezers, and shelves of stored samples. "This place isn't under any agency's control," she said, "and I've invested nearly everything I had to build it. The question is, are you ready to start over from here?" I looked around, instinctively placing a hand on my belly, then nodded. "I've never been more ready." From then on, outside clinic hours, I dedicated every night to developing an alternative to S-Therma, a cancer treatment for late-stage patients that didn't cause severe liver damage like the original. I didn't have Foster Biotech's million-dollar budgets, but I had freedom. No deadlines forced on me, no data buried, no ideas twisted for profit. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I'd remember those cold nights outside the villa, shaking hands, holding unsigned divorce papers, and I knew those memories kept me going. At 31 weeks pregnant, just as I was finalizing a new formula with promising potential, Evelyn walked into the lab with a grave expression. "You need to see this," she said, handing me a medical industry article published the night before. FF Biotech denies allegations of concealing severe side effects during drug trials. Below was a quote. "A report from an anonymous source suggests that CFO Carter Langston may have approved manipulated data." I reread it again and again. Evelyn looked at me and quietly said, "Maybe that anonymous source is waiting for you to speak." For the first time in months, my heart pounded not from fear, but hope. Someone else out there was starting to question things, and if I could bring enough proof, the truth wouldn't stay buried. I met Evelyn's eyes, voice steady. "Then it's time Foster Biotech learns they picked the wrong woman to erase." I gave birth to my twins on a sunny afternoon in May, as soft light streamed through the clinic's delivery room window in Boston. Ellis and Mira entered the world strong and loud, their cries echoing like they were announcing their place in it. I held them close, sweat and tears mixing as my heart pounded, not just from pain, but because I knew they were the only reason I never gave up. There was no father waiting outside the door, no flowers, no magazine covers like when Mason and I graced Forbes as the golden couple of pharma. Just Evelyn wiping my forehead, and Marlene standing beside the bed, eyes red, smile beaming. After birth, I spent the first 2 weeks focused solely on healing and caring for my babies, but my mind never stopped working. Each night, once they were asleep, I returned to the lab with Evelyn, with one mission growing clearer. If I wanted my treatment to reach real patients, I couldn't just submit it to the FDA and hope it got noticed. I needed a foundation, a company. At first, the idea felt crazy. I had no money, no reputation, and almost no allies left in the field after my silent dismissal from Foster Biotech. But Evelyn, calm and razor-sharp, made me believe in the impossible. "You don't just need a place to sell medicine," she said. "You need a company that resets this industry's moral compass, and if no one's willing to fund it, I'll be your first investor." My eyes widened. "How much are you willing to put in?" "Enough to hire a lawyer for copyright filing, build a secure database, and bring in the 3 most brilliant people I've ever worked with. But I have one condition." She paused, locking eyes with me. "You will retain full control, and no matter how effective our drug is, it must remain affordable. We don't trade lives for profit." I nodded, without a single hesitation. We named the company Lunaris Therapeutics, inspired by Mira, my little girl with eyes like a new moon. I went back to using my maiden name, Nora Whitmore, to avoid attention from the media and those who still believed I had vanished in scandal. Then I threw myself into the work like a monsoon, drafting patent proposals, strategizing outreach to small hospitals, and designing an expanded trial plan based on existing data. 3 months later, Lunaris was granted its first patent, LT17, a refined derivative of the S-therma formula. It showed promising suppression of advanced-stage pancreatic cancer cells, with over a 70% reduction in liver toxicity compared to the original drug. There were no headlines, no press conferences, but I knew that somewhere out there patients in treatment might now have access to something safer. And that was enough. One evening, as I held Ellis asleep on my chest, Evelyn placed a folder in front of me. "There's an angel investor who wants to meet you," she said. I opened it, paused when I saw the name Rebecca Goldman, former chief strategy officer at Terralin Pharmaceuticals, who had resigned after the company was caught hiding adverse reaction data. She said, "If Nora Whitmore had the courage to come back after everything, maybe this industry finally has a shot at real change." 3 days later, I met Rebecca in a small cafe in Cambridge. She didn't ask about my past or offer pity. She simply looked me in the eye and said, "I'll invest $2 million for 15% equity, on one condition. You stick to your ethical product promise." I lost sight of that once, and I don't want anyone else to walk the path I did. We shook hands, no paperwork, just trust between 2 women who had both survived the wreckage. When I returned to the lab that night, my hands still trembling, Evelyn just smiled. "Well, you're not standing alone anymore." I looked up at the newly printed logo on the glass door, Lunaris Therapeutics. Below it, in small letters, science, integrity. In less than 2 years, Lunaris Therapeutics, once a no-name, was now a buzzword at medical conferences and across pharma industry forums. It all started when Mercy General, one of the largest hospital systems on the East Coast, terminated their drug contract with Foster Biotech to sign an exclusive deal with us. At the time, Foster was still a titan. They treated the announcement like the buzzing of a fly, but what Carter Langston didn't realize, or refused to see, was that we didn't just have a better drug. We had a story. Frontline doctors quickly began sharing stories about LT17, a new treatment for pancreatic cancer that delivered results without the liver toxicity of Foster's S-therma. During a closed meeting with Mercy General's oncology leadership, the chief oncologist said just one thing: "We don't need ads. We need outcomes. And Lunaris delivers." Next came Sinalora, then Harmony Care in Chicago. We began moving into the market quietly but steadily, like an underground current. Unseen but powerful. Carter still hadn't realized it until Foster's sales department reported that S-therma's Q3 sales had dropped 32% year over year. They called an emergency meeting. I knew, not because anyone on the inside betrayed them, but because everything I did left traces only an industry insider would notice. One day, while reviewing reports from a West Coast hospital network, I saw Foster was rushing to launch a supposedly improved version of S-therma, called S-therma Plus, a name that screamed lazy marketing. I smiled at the tagline, "Enhanced absorption, reduced side effects." They were panicking, they were afraid, and that was the sign. It was time to strike back. I met with Evelyn and Rebecca to plan a small-scale production expansion in Massachusetts, Illinois, and Oregon. While still modest compared to Foster's operations, our team was committed to absolute quality. We didn't just ship the drug, we included transparent data, detailed medical guides, and a direct hotline for physicians. In less than 6 months, the name Lunaris started appearing in industry reports as a promising startup disrupting the market. And then something happened that I never saw coming. Medical Economics Weekly published a full 2-page spread titled, "Lunaris? The single mom-led startup that's making pharma giants nervous?" I sat still, staring at the screen. In the article was a photo of me holding Mira at a spring symposium, with Ellis asleep on Evelyn's shoulder. They didn't use my real name, only referred to me as Dr. Whitmore, the resilient founder. But anyone who'd ever known Nora Foster would recognize me. Just as I expected, a week later I received an email from an anonymous address. "Carter is worried. He says if Lunaris keeps taking market share, the board will be forced to investigate all the trial data. I can't reveal who I am, but I have files you'll want to see." Attached was an encrypted folder containing internal trial reports that had been altered, evidence that could bring down Foster Biotech if released properly. I immediately sent the data to Rebecca's legal team. While they began verifying every number, I started planning the next step, launching our newest product, a late-stage leukemia treatment with a significantly higher recovery rate. Evelyn walked into my office while I reviewed launch materials. She looked at me and said quietly, "You know, when we started, I didn't dare believe we'd come this far." I smiled. "I didn't either, but now I do, because this time, we don't just have the drug. We have the truth." She nodded. And truth, once spoken, makes even the most powerful tremble. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Mira tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Are you going to be away again?" I bent down and kissed her forehead. "I go to work so that one day, you'll never have to be afraid of someone just because they have more money." Back in the office, staring at the battle map pinned on the wall, I knew the biggest fight was still ahead, but this time I wasn't walking into it alone. And this time I had a team behind me. And 2 little ones whose lives gave me a purpose beyond anything else. I never planned to crash Mason Foster's wedding. I simply chose the day they tried to rewrite our story in glittering lies, to bring the truth back to its rightful place. On June 15th, exactly 6 years after I was thrown out of that villa like a stranger, I stepped off a black helicopter holding Mira and Ellis, my 6-year-old twins. Each wore formal outfits they picked themselves for the day we meet Dad. I wore a tailored navy suit, no patterns, no jewelry, only resolve and truth. The roar of the rotor cut through the silent outdoor ceremony on the Foster estate. Hundreds of guests turned, eyes wide with surprise and curiosity. Alyssa, the bride, froze mid-step on the flower-covered aisle. Lips pressed tight as she saw Mason standing still, eyes locked on the descending aircraft. The door opened. I stepped out first. The wind whipped my hair, flared my coat with the rhythm of a heart containing a storm. Ellis and Mira followed, each clutching one of my hands, walking steady. As if they knew this wasn't an intrusion, it was a reclamation. "Who is she?" Elisa hissed, turning to Mason. "What's happening?" But Mason didn't answer, because he had recognized me from the first moment. I stopped at the front row, gaze scanning the murmuring crowd, then fixed on Mason. "Hello, Mason," I said. My voice was clear, unwavering. "I think it's time you met the past you tried to erase." Elisa stepped back, but Mason stayed rooted, his eyes locked on the children. "This is Mira and Ellis," I said, "my children. And if you still have any conscience left, also yours." A ripple of gasps echoed across the lawn. An older woman, Mason's mother, shot up from her seat, hand over mouth. "Oh my! They look exactly like Mason when he was little." I continued, cutting through the noise. "6 years ago you kicked me out based on fabricated evidence from Carter and Alyssa. They didn't just destroy our marriage, they embezzled over $70 million from Foster Biotech and pinned the entire blame on me." Carter, standing beside Mason as best man, instinctively stepped back. Alyssa, now pale as paper, stammered, You're insane. This is slander." I held up a file. I brought account statements, internal emails, and drug trial data alteration reports signed by Carter. All of it was sent to the FBI, the SEC, and the FDA this morning, but I came here first, for you, Mason, so you'd know the truth, before the media breaks the story. Mason stepped back, face pale. I didn't know. You thought I betrayed you, but the truth is, you chose to believe the people who wanted you to fail, I cut in. You turned your back on me while I was carrying the two lives you're only now seeing for the first time. Sirens blared in the distance, growing louder until they reached the villa gates. 2 agents in black suits entered, flashing their badges. Carter Langston, Alyssa Walker, you'll need to come with us in connection to an investigation into financial fraud and medical data manipulation. Lisa screamed in protest while Carter stayed silent, his face stone cold. As they were escorted away, I turned to Mason. No longer the arrogant CEO I once knew, but a man watching his world collapse. You chose to erase me from your life, I said, eyes locked on his. But I didn't come here to reclaim your love. I came so my children would know they were never a secret. They deserved to stand in the light, even if their father chose the shadows. Mira looked up and asked softly, Mom, is Daddy going to stay now? I bent down and took her hand. That's not for me to decide, sweetheart. But I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. The entire garden went silent. I turned and began walking Ellis and Myra down the stone path. As we passed the banquet tables, I noticed the staged photos of Mason and Alyssa, their fake smiles captured in a perfect frame. I didn't smash them. I didn't need to. The truth had shattered enough. I didn't come for revenge. I came for closure. And that ending was the beginning of something kinder, something better for the 3 of us. Mason stayed frozen where he stood, his expression blank as marble. He had just watched his fiancée get taken away by the FBI along with his closest friend, Carter Langston, the man he had trusted with everything. But what truly shook him wasn't the handcuffs or the snapping cameras of the press. It was the presence of the 2 children, Mira and Ellis, holding my hands, staring at him with the same eyes he once saw in his own reflection. Mason slowly stepped down from the altar, ignoring the stares of the guests. He only stopped when he stood before me and the twins. He looked at Ellis, then Mira, his lips moving as if trying to speak, but no words came out. Is this real? He finally whispered. They really are I nodded gently. You once requested a DNA test, remember? I submitted the results to the court 3 months ago, but you never came to collect them. He took a step back as if struck. I didn't know. I never saw anything. Carter blocked it all, I said, calm but sharp. The court noticed my letters, even the 12-page explanation I wrote while I was still pregnant. Mason pressed a hand to his forehead and stumbled toward the chaos of the banquet table. God, I trusted him. He looked at me. I ruined everything. I said nothing. There was no comfort for someone who turned away when I needed him most. Right then, Agent Beckett from the FBI approached. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, voice calm but firm. We received all the materials you submitted. Falsified financial records, evidence of offshore transfers under Alyssa and Carter's names, and unauthorized changes to the drug trial data. I nodded. I still have more to send. Audio recordings of internal meetings where Carter pressured me to sign off on falsified reports. Beckett gave me a respectful look. Your cooperation is going to help a lot of people, not just the staff at Foster Biotech, but the patients. They deserve to know the truth. I glanced at Mason, now slumped in a chair, head in his hands, surrounded by the ruins of a wedding that had turned into a public downfall. Everything that had once built his image as the golden heir was gone in under 2 hours. May I have a few more minutes with him? I asked. Beckett nodded and stepped back. I walked over to Mason. I didn't come here to destroy you, Mason. I came to protect the 2 children you abandoned. He looked up, eyes red. I really didn't know. I thought you cheated on you. Slept with someone named Liam? Left perfume on strange shirts? It was all orchestrated by people who wanted your position, I said evenly. And you believed them. Not once did you ask me. Not once. Because I was too weak to see the truth, he murmured. I couldn't believe someone would go that far, fabricate it all so perfectly. I said nothing. Even apologies can arrive too late. And Lunaris? He asked. You really started that company? I nodded. Nora Whitmore. My birth name. I used it to stay unconnected to Foster at the beginning. But I don't need to hide anymore. Mason straightened in his seat. Lunaris is taking over the market. The board is questioning me. They're starting to doubt the data. Now I understand why. I turned to go but paused. I don't hate you, Mason, I said. I just don't trust you anymore. And in this world, that's more dangerous than hate. I walked back to Mira and Ellis. They stood quietly side by side, but their eyes told me they understood more than I'd ever taught them. Mason called after me. Can I see them? I turned, meeting his gaze. That's not up to me. It's up to them. If they want to, I won't stop them. But this time you have to earn it. Not with your name, not with money, with truth. And then I walked away from the wedding. I wasn't thinking about winning, I wasn't celebrating, just a quiet relief, as if I'd finally snapped the last chain tying me to a past that no longer had space for me. For the first time in 6 years, I was truly free. 3 days after the interrupted wedding, I received a short message from Mason. I need to see you, just once. Not to apologize, just to take responsibility. I didn't respond right away, partly because I was tied up in legal meetings related to the Foster Biotech case, but also because I needed to ask myself, was I even willing to reopen the door he'd once slammed in my face? But that evening, when I saw Mira carefully pasting a newspaper clipping into her handmade journal, the photo of me holding both kids, walking away from the wedding, I knew they needed answers. Not from me, from the man who had made their past a mystery for 6 years. I replied, tomorrow, 3 p.m. Lunaris office. Mason arrived right on time. No longer the polished CEO or the groom in a garden, but a man with tired eyes, a wrinkled gray shirt and no tie. He stood outside the office door, hesitating. When I opened it, he nodded slightly. Thank you for giving me this chance. I didn't reply. I just motioned to the seat across from me, the tea already poured and waiting. First, he began, I know there's nothing I can say today that will undo what's happened, but I still want to say it. I stayed silent, keeping my eyes on him. I was a coward, he said. I chose silence when I should have asked questions. I let Carter control what I thought, let Elisa soothe my doubts with sweet words, and when things started to spiral, I took the easy way out. I blamed you. His voice cracked, his hand gripped the teacup like he was punishing himself. I thought I was protecting the company, protecting myself. But what I really did was push away the one person who ever truly stood by me, right when you needed me most. I took a deep breath. Do you know what the security team told me when I said I was pregnant? Mason looked up, slowly shook his head. They said I was using the pregnancy to extort money, and when I screamed that the baby was yours, they repeated what you told them. I don't care whose baby it is. He froze. I never said that, I swear. I know, I replied, now I know, but back then, I had no one to back me up. Mason bowed his head. After a long moment, he looked up again, eyes red. I don't deserve to be their father. I looked at him for a long time, then shook my head. No one's born deserving. Being a father isn't about worthiness. It's about courage. And if you really want to be a part of their lives, I won't stop you. He nodded, eyes glossy. But, I continued, that doesn't mean I forgive you, or that we'll ever go back to what we were. I'm not asking for that, he said quickly. I just want to make things right. For Ellis, for Mira, for everything I missed. I stood, walked to my desk, and took out a small box. The kids have this habit, I said, placing the box in front of him. Every year they make a memory box. They fill it with the most important things. Last year's box had pictures of me, Evelyn, Marlene, drawings, a few toys. But this year, I handed him a drawing. In it there were 4 figures, me, Ellis, Mira, and a tall man standing between them holding their hands. Mira asked, Mom, if I draw Dad, will he be real? I smiled softly, but my voice fell. I couldn't answer, that part is up to you. Mason took the drawing, his hands trembling. He stared at the childlike sketch as if it were a masterpiece, like he was seeing himself for the first time through the eyes of the children he never knew he had. Thank you, he whispered. I opened the door. You can start by meeting them. But don't show up with flowers or expensive gifts. They don't need a hero, they need someone real. He nodded and stepped outside, but before leaving he turned back. I used to think losing you was the biggest shock of my life, but it turns out losing the chance to know them? That's what will keep me up at night for the rest of my life. When I didn't respond, I simply closed the door. Because sometimes forgiveness doesn't come through promises, it comes through actions, repeated, steady, and full of commitment. 3 weeks after the wedding fell apart, Foster Biotech spiraled into full-blown crisis. The stock price plummeted by nearly 40%, major contracts were suspended one after another, and the media flooded headlines with financial scandals, falsified data, and the dramatic arrests of Carter Langston and Alyssa Walker. The board panicked, employees wavered, thousands of patients lost trust. In the midst of that chaos, Mason did something no one expected. He reached out to me, not as a father seeking redemption, but as a CEO trying to salvage the legacy his family had built. I'd like to request a meeting, he wrote in an email. I'm not coming to reclaim a title, reputation, or power. I'm coming to ask, is there a way for Foster to survive without destroying what's left? I read his message and sat in silence for a long time. Then I replied with an attachment, a merger proposal between Lunaris Therapeutics and Foster Biotech. Not a takeover, not a buyout, a conditional unification. Foster would retain its brand, but under Lunaris's new ethical standards. All research procedures would be revalidated, and the interim board would not be led by Mason, it would be led by me. The board meeting was held privately at Foster's New York headquarters. I arrived without fanfare, no press, no entourage. Just me, Evelyn Moore, and an 80-page proposal. The boardroom was long and cold. 12 members sat in a row, some I recognized from galas in the past. Their expressions were cautious, guarded. Mason stood at the far end of the table, no longer the proud CEO, but a man carrying the weight of his past, hoping to make it right. Thank you all for your time, Mason began. I know the current situation is difficult, and I'm not here to offer a miracle. I'm here to present a plan that may prevent Foster from complete collapse. He stepped aside and motioned for me to take the floor. I walked forward slowly, placing copies of the proposal before each member. No one objected. Every eye followed as I began to speak. I'm Nora Whitmore, founder and CEO of Lunaris Therapeutics, I said briefly. But some of you may know me by another name, Nora Foster. The room fell silent. I was once Mason Foster's wife. I was once cast out of the very home I shared with him, because of forged evidence orchestrated by Carter and Alyssa. I lost everything, my job, my reputation, my finances. While pregnant with twins. A silver-haired man in the corner coughed. A younger woman glanced at Mason, stunned. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, I continued. I'm telling you because I walked away from that past and built a pharmaceutical company grounded in 2 principles. Transparency, and humanity. I started the presentation projecting data on the screen. Clinical results. LT17 efficacy rates. Distribution prices 40% lower than Foster's previous drug, and the number of patients benefiting. The charts weren't flashy, they were clear and direct. Foster has lost the public's trust, I said, and Lunaris holds what Foster let go of, the trust of hospitals, doctors, and patients. But I don't want to destroy Foster. I want to rebuild it. I paused. I'm proposing a joint model, where Foster maintains its manufacturing and distribution networks, while Lunaris takes over research, quality, and ethical oversight. We retain staff, keep the medication flowing, and ensure no patient suffers an interruption in care. A board member looked up. Do you truly believe we can recover from this, after everything? I met his gaze. I don't believe in can, I believe in must. If Foster collapses, patients pay the price. But if we merge, we create a new model, one rooted in truth. No one spoke for a long moment. Then Mason stood. I support this plan, not because I want redemption, but because it's the only right path forward. Edward Green, the board chair, said quietly, we'll need to vote. The vote happened immediately, 8 in favor, 3 abstained, 1 opposed. The proposal passed. As I left the boardroom, Evelyn touched my shoulder. Do you know why they said yes? I looked at her and shook my head. Not because of Mason, not because of the numbers, but because you came back, not to get revenge, but to repair what was broken. I didn't reply. Because I knew forgiveness only means something when it's followed by action, and today that action was giving Foster one last chance. 2 months after that pivotal board meeting, Foster Biotech officially merged with Lunaris Therapeutics. The name Lunaris Foster began appearing in financial reports, at medical summits, and most importantly, in the minds of those who once doubted that the pharma industry could operate with integrity. For me, though, the numbers were no longer the center of my world. That place belonged to 2 little ones with their 7th birthday fast approaching. Mira and Ellis had never had a real birthday party. In past years, it was just me, Marlene, and Dr. Evelyn, a homemade cake and a few small gifts. They'd never had grandparents bring books, never had their dad tell bedtime stories. But this year, I wanted something different. Not to patch over the past, but to show them that the empty spaces in our hearts can be filled, if we're brave enough to open the door again. I invited Mason, and for the first time, he didn't show up with a polished smile or a businessman's mask. He came with an old guitar and a promise to sing the lullaby I used to hum to Mira as a baby. His voice wasn't perfect, but when Ellis joined in with his toy drum and Mira danced to the rhythm, I knew. It was the most beautiful harmony I'd ever heard. I also invited Mason's parents, the twins' grandparents. They sat quietly at first, unsure, keeping their distance, but when Mira walked up and handed them a drawing that read, "To Grandma and Grandpa, we hope you stay," I saw Mason's mother cry. And then, in a moment of instinct, she knelt and hugged Mira, hands trembling as she stroked her back. "We'll stay," she whispered, "if you'll have us." The party was held in the backyard of our new Lunaris office. A grassy lot we turned into a small playground, with balloons, cupcakes, and people I never imagined sitting at the same table. Evelyn stood beside Marlene, 2 women with completely different styles, but the same heart that once carried me through. Rebecca, now CFO of Lunaris Foster, stood laughing with our young engineering team as Ellis proudly showed off his Lego spaceship model. At one point I stepped back, stood on the patio steps holding a cup of juice, just watching. Mason was helping Mira tie her shoelaces with care. Ellis ran circles around his grandfather, pulling him to play ball. Evelyn was showing Rebecca how to load film into an old camera. And I realized for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Mason walked over, keeping a respectful distance. "Thank you for letting me be here today." I looked at him. "I didn't do this for you, Mason. I did it for Mira and Ellis. They deserve to know that their father isn't just a name in their mother's stories." He nodded, eyes slightly glassy. "I know. And I won't waste this second chance." We didn't say anything else. There was no need. We just quietly watched the 2 kids blow out their candles, their cheeks puffed with anticipation, grinning from ear to ear. When the flame disappeared, Mira shouted, "I made my wish! But I can't tell. Mom said so." Ellis looked at me, then at Mason. "But I think Dad can guess, right?" Mason smiled. "I might have a guess, but I'll let you 2 keep your secret. That's my gift." That night, after everyone left, I cleaned up the yard, full of cake crumbs, balloons, and presents. Mira and Ellis were fast asleep in my office, now temporarily a tiny bedroom with 2 glittery astronaut sleeping bags. Mason came over, set his guitar back in its case, and hesitated. "Can I help take them home?" I thought for a second. "They're staying here tonight. Evelyn's taking them to school in the morning." He nodded, but didn't leave right away. "Can I stay a little longer? Not to talk business, just to hear Mira's favorite song one more time." I glanced into the office, where the kids were curled up under soft yellow light. "Okay," I said, "as long as you don't wake them." He chuckled softly, sat down on the steps, and played the recording from his phone. The music played gently in the night, mingling with the hum of crickets in the breeze. I sat beside him, no longer guarded, no longer expecting anything. We simply sat there, 2 people who once hurt each other, now breathing in rhythm, looking ahead to the lives we had created. And were just beginning to nurture again. One late afternoon, while Mira and I were replanting flower beds behind the new Lunaris Foster building, David appeared. carrying a small lavender pot and a bag of almond cookies he had baked himself. Mira squealed with joy and ran to him like he was an old friend, not someone who had only recently entered her mother's life. I looked up and squinted with a smile. Dr. David Torres, arriving just in time to lift some soil. He laughed, took off his gloves and knelt beside me. I heard this garden was looking for a quiet assistant who knows how to listen. Mira stood between us holding the pot, giggling. David's really good at baking. He used to be the doctor for my teddy bear too. I laughed. That's right. Ellis still keeps that pretend bandage as a souvenir. David never rushed into our lives. He didn't push, didn't pry, and never tried to replace anyone. He just showed up, quietly and consistently. Evelyn once said, David doesn't enter your life with grand declarations. He just walks beside you until you realize you've been leaning on him all along. I had doubts. I feared I couldn't love again, that my heart had gone numb after everything. But David never asked for love up front. He just needed me to open a small door. That fall, when I brought Mira and Ellis to a solar system exhibit David was running for pediatric patients at the hospital, I saw him crouched among the kids holding a plastic Pluto model, patiently explaining its features. Ellis squeezed in beside him and Mira raised her hand. If the universe has no limits, then maybe the people we love don't either, right? David turned to me at that moment, and I knew my heart had just shifted. We started taking evening walks around the lake behind Evelyn's clinic. He brought coffee, I brought a notebook. Some nights we just listened to each other breathe. Some nights we talked about things no one else had the patience to hear. How Ellis liked using scientific terms to tell fairy tales, or how Mira believed sunflowers knew how to keep promises. One late winter night, as snow began to fall gently, David stopped under an old oak tree and pulled a small silver necklace from his coat. No ring, no diamonds, just a delicate pendant shaped like a torn flower petal. A quiet reminder that even imperfect things can be beautiful. It's not a promise to bind you, he said, voice low and steady. It's a reminder. You don't have to face everything alone anymore. I held the pendant and looked at him, feeling something quiet and real, like the moment I first held Mira after she was born. Fragile, new, but full of life. All my life, I whispered, I've been trying to answer one question. How do you survive being abandoned, betrayed, and stripped of everything? David stayed silent, letting me continue. But now, I'm trying to answer a different question. How do you rebuild, not from pain but from what's worth keeping? He didn't smile or say a word, he just nodded as if it was the most natural thing in the world. We didn't call each other lovers, we didn't hang romantic photos, but Mira began drawing him into family portraits. Ellis wrote his name under people I trust. Evelyn never commented, but I noticed she started placing a third teacup on the table whenever I visited. One day, as I worked on my speech for the National Medical Conference, Ellis came running in to show me a new space model, and David walked in holding a container of food he'd cooked. Mira ran from the kitchen yelling, "Mom, our house is so fun!" I looked up at the three of them buzzing around me and felt a quiet but steady warmth. Like sunlight breaking through morning fog after a long winter. Not blinding, not overwhelming, just enough to melt everything that had ever frozen. I didn't need a proposal. I didn't need a gold-foiled invitation. I just needed this. A life where I wake up each morning knowing I'm no longer living for revenge, but for love. Not stuck in the past but building a future, one I chose, with a heart that had finally healed. That afternoon, golden light filtered through the oak tree in front of the house, casting dancing specks across the lawn. Mira ran through the garden, her dress flaring, while Ellis sat beside David working on a model spaceship. Evelyn chatted with the Fosters at the wooden table, and Marlene arranged pastries on a tray like a proper English tea party in the middle of New England. The laughter was gentle, not loud, just enough to make it feel like home. I stood quietly on the steps, taking it all in. Sometimes I still couldn't believe it was real, that after all the wreckage, I could see real smiles on the faces of people who had once lived in different worlds, now sitting side by side sharing apple pie and old stories. Victor approached, holding a camera. "Don't look at me like I'm about to cry," he said, half joking. "The kids just assigned me as memory keeper for today." I smiled. "Then you'd better get it right. Mira will remember forever if the angle's off." Victor nodded, his gaze lingering briefly on David, who was laughing with Ellis. He's a good guy, he said. I've known that for a while, just took time to admit it. I looked at him. You've changed, Victor. Not perfect, but enough for the kids to trust you. He nodded slowly. Thank you. For not erasing me from their memories. I shook my head. They need to know the truth, the good parts and the pain, but what matters is, you chose right in the end. He gave a wistful smile. Not the family I imagined, but maybe, he paused, even better than I hoped for. That's when Mira ran over, pulling everyone toward the porch. It's photo time. Dad, Mom, David, Grandma, Grandpa, Evelyn, Marlene, get in the frame. Everyone shuffled into place under the direction of our bossy little 7-year-old. I stood to David's right, Ellis on my left, his hand wrapped tightly in mine. Mira beamed between me and Victor as bright as the autumn sun. After adjusting the camera, Victor hit the timer and rushed over just in time for the shutter to click. We weren't posed perfectly. Someone's hair was messy. David had dirt on his knee. Victor stood a little off-center. But that photo captured something I thought I had lost for good over the last 7 years. A family. Not perfect, but whole. That night, as I cleaned the kitchen with David, my phone buzzed. A text from Victor. Just one line. Not the way I imagined it, but maybe even better than I hoped for. I didn't respond right away. I looked over at David, the man who didn't come to replace anyone but simply to stay, the man who waited patiently until I was ready, who walked beside me in every small decision. He was laughing with Ellis and Mira, washing his hands, pretending to complain about the cookie team that eats more than they bake. Warm yellow light from the kitchen cast a glow over all 3 of them, and I realized, this is what happiness really is. Not a perfect ending, but a new beginning, where the past is set down, the present is cherished, and the future is built on forgiveness, connection, and love. I picked up my phone and typed a short reply to Victor, because we chose what was right for the kids and for ourselves. I hit send, then set the phone down, and returned to dinner, where there was laughter, the smell of cookies, and love. Quiet, steady, present, in every second. Nora's story isn't just about overcoming heartbreak. It's proof of the strength that comes from perseverance, forgiveness, and rebuilding, even when everything seems lost. From a single mom cast out of the life she once built, she rose again, raising 2 children with love and courage. More importantly, Nora learned to live not for revenge, but for a future worth protecting. What do you think about Nora's journey and the choices she made? Would you have done the same? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to hear more inspiring stories about family and healing.